Y'all sound so tired. School! Man, suckers. I'm just kidding. School's the best. If we haven't had the chance to meet and you want to know who just made fun of you for being in school, my name is Austin Walker and I work here. I'm a student pastor here, and I'm just really glad that you guys are spending the evening with us, spending some time with us. We're in the middle of this series called You in 5 Years, with the idea being, what if the things that you do now shape who you're going to be in 5 years? And a lot of you, senior class in here in 5 years, that's a long time away. But spoiler alert, it's also the same amount of time for you freshmen. Like, that's just how time works. It's going to be the same. And one of the things that I've really liked about this series, we have decided, just all of our campuses, to do something to try and unify where we're headed with this stuff. And so what we've done is we've picked a verse that we feel like really speaks to our desire for this series. And so here's what I want to do. We're going to put it on the screen. It's Psalm 16:11. And I just want us to all read it out loud. I'll count us down so you don't have to know whether or not, all you have to be able to do is read out loud. And if that's not your jam, just pretend. But this is us kind of bringing some focus to where we're headed. So on all of our locations and all of our campuses, we're saying this together each week of this. So if y'all would say this with me out loud, setting our time together. You will show me the way of life, granting me the joy of your presence and the pleasures of living with you forever. Psalm 16:11. And that's what we want. We want in 5 years to look back and say, okay, this is the life that God has given me. This is the life that I've been called to live. And I think it's important to note tonight, a lot of what we're talking about is the spoken word. I think there's power in saying those things together. 2 weeks ago, we started this series. We talked about how who we are in 5 years is going to be greatly determined by the difficult things we do when they don't make sense and leave us vulnerable. We talked about wanting to be a people that dig ditches, that do the hard work that doesn't make sense, that leaves us vulnerable, in the hopes that God would move and God would pour out his blessing and that we would be found obedient. And we talked about how those small decisions, those hard things are going to be what shape and change in a large part who we're going to be in 5 years. And if you miss that and the whole idea of digging ditches doesn't make sense to you, go to our YouTube page or ask a neighbor and you can figure it out. Because tonight, we're talking about something a little bit different. Tonight is a bit of a different kind of vibe, a different direction than where we normally go. And to be totally honest with you tonight, this is probably the most vulnerable message that I've ever written. In fact, I didn't really even want to write this, because as authentic and transparent as I try and be on stage, there's parts of my life and parts of the way that I think about myself and the things that I believe about myself and have to push back against is really embarrassing. I'm really self-conscious about a lot of this, but as I really wrestle through this is a spiritual discipline that we're going to unpack that for those of you that aren't believers, I think still applies to a certain degree. Like to a certain percentage, I think what we're talking about tonight still lands with you, but and you'll still benefit from it. But for those of us in here that are believers or Christians, this is something that I think will greatly change who you are. It's something I'll unpack a little bit when we get into the details, but it's something that in June I started wrestling with a little bit. In July, I started working through, and it's been a part of my daily rhythm, anywhere from 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week since August. And I will say I feel more excited about who God is because of what this spiritual discipline has done in my life. And my hope for you is in the same way that I believe I'm going to be a different pastor, a different husband, a different father, a different leader, a different believer, a different friend because of this discipline we're talking about tonight. I hope that you will be a different person in 5 years if you do this really basic but uncomfortable thing. And so tonight, if I had to boil it down into one thought, it's the idea that I think my life will be different in 5 years based upon the things that I say about myself and to myself for those 5 years. Let me say that again. I think my life in 5 years will be different based upon the things that I say to myself and about myself over those 5 years. I think our self-talk, the things that we hear in our thought life, have a huge, monumental impact on who we are. And we hear that, and it's really easy to think, okay, this is like self-help stuff. This is just like put Jesus aside and just name it, claim it. And so I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life being like, Lord, I'm going to be rich and maybe smart. Rich and maybe smart. Rich and maybe smart. Austin said, that's how it works. That's not what I'm saying. Like for those of you to go home and say, I'm going to go to the Olympics for badminton, that's maybe. If you are, that is awesome and so just strange. But that's not quite what I'm saying. But it's also not completely different. Because I really do think that our thoughts and the things that we say about ourselves have a huge impact on who we become and who we are and how we experience our life. So this isn't self-help. This isn't 5 steps without Jesus to a better life. I believe this to be a spiritual discipline with a deeply biblical basis that pushes our very soul out of its comfort zone. So just as a heads up, this we try on Wednesday nights to kind of put the cookies on the bottom shelf. But if you go with me on this tonight, we're going to kind of call you up a little bit. It's going to put you in an uncomfortable spot, but I think that discomfort is going to be what changes you. Because our tendency is to say, okay, dude, whatever, like, my thought life, I'm pretty good about, like, if that's bad, I'm not going to think about it. That's good. Whatever. Like, I don't think really my thoughts change who I am. We're going to see before we unpack what this discipline is a priority of our thought life. We're going to be in 2 Corinthians, but first, we're going to jump a little bit all over the place. 1 Peter 1:13, we have it on the screen, says this. So prepare your minds for action and exercise self-control. Put all your hope in the gracious salvation that will come to you when Jesus Christ is revealed to the world. Now look at this. We're going to leave these verses on the screen as we kind of work through. Prepare your minds for action. The rest of this book leading up into this point, Peter is talking about, hey, here, your life has been changed by this Jesus. You are a new person. Everything is there. Your life is changed and transformed. And then he says, therefore, so prepare your minds. The implication, the understanding of this is there's an active role that we have to play as people who know and love Jesus to shape our thought patterns. It's an active thing. The language used in this is prepare for war. Something is coming and you need to make sure that you're ready. We have an active role to play in our thought life, and we can't negate and we can't neglect the way that unpacks. But I think it's really interesting how Paul says in Romans, this verse, these 2 verses together, Romans 8, 5, and 6, he phrases it really interestingly. It says, those who are dominated by the sinful nature think about sinful things, but those who are controlled by the Holy Spirit think about things that please the Spirit. So, letting your sinful nature control your mind leads to what? It's on the screen. Leads to death. But letting the Spirit control your mind leads to life and peace. What we see, and we can't miss this, Paul says, if the Spirit controls your mind, it leads you to experience life and peace. If sin, if death, if destruction, if the brokenness of our world, if the darkness of our world controls your thought life, that leads you down the path not to mental anguish, not to mental darkness, but to death. What we see Paul unpacking in this is so important to how we live our lives. Your thought life directs your real life. If you're taking notes, if you need to write something in the margin, your thought life directs, it impacts, it guides, it leads your real life. This is core to everything, that our thoughts determine the direction of our life. And we know this. We don't really think about this, but girls, let's say there is a particular guy that consumes the majority of your thoughts, right? Like there's a guy, and that's normal, and it's fine, and you think about him, and it's great until you accidentally write his last name with your first name on a paper. Then it gets uncomfortable for everybody, right? Or you're thinking about him all the time, and then you realize there are so many guys that have just names that are so much dumber than his name. Or, the quickest route to get from this class to this class is here. You're like, but I could go this way instead, and I know that his class is here, and so we're just gonna make sure that he's okay and having a good day and nothing's wrong and I can't fix anything, we're not getting married. Like, we can just do that. And it changes, that was a jump. It changes your real life. Your thought life begins to impact and shape the way that you make decisions and the way that you experience life. Video games, movies, all of that stuff. Like when you're playing a video game, especially for our junior high students, I won't ask you to show your hand, how many high school guys are still playing Fortnite, but like you and I both know you walk through a building, you're like, look at all the metal I could harvest. Like I could just shikut, and then I can build things. It impacts the way you view your life. Our thought life directs our real life. The way that we think has a deep, deep impact on the life we have. It's so important to realize that it will determine the outcome. Think about this. If there are two people that wake up and one person, maybe you can relate to this. One person, their thought life, as soon as they wake up, goes something along the lines of, I'm exhausted. There is no way that I got enough sleep. What's the point of trying to even put on something to look nice? I'm gonna have to lose 10 pounds before any of this fits, so there's no chance, there's no point. My mom's just gonna yell at me for running late if I try too hard anyway and take too long. I can't believe that I look this way. I can't forget my homework. I didn't finish it, but a 60 is better than a 0, and I need all the help I can get with the test later this week that I'm never gonna pass. Time to go to school where no one cares I exist. The teachers think I'm an idiot. I hate everyone I see, and I'm bound to get in trouble for something I didn't even do. I need some coffee. That person who has that thought life, and this is a caricature. This is like an exaggeration in a lot of ways, but to some of us, it's not. To some of us, that's really true to form of the way that we think, the thought life that we have when we wake up in the morning, and our thought life directs our real life. That person, no matter what happens, is not going to have a good day. But then imagine there's somebody else. They wake up in the morning and, man, I'm feeling tired, but today is going to be a great day. God's given me another day. It's going to go well. I'm going to use this day for his glory. I need to throw some clothes on and get around so I can live today to the best of my ability. I may be running late, but that pimple's going to fade and I can't forget about my homework. I didn't do very well, but it'll be all right. I need to figure out what's on that test. God, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to go to school and be intentional in everything I do. Give me the chance to show people who you are. Now, coffee. That is a very different thing. And for some of you, you're like, that's not real. Like, I know that. I know that. Like, I don't want to be friends with person number 2, but I'm pretty sure that I'm way too close to person number 1. And here's what I know to be true. If person number 1, Debbie Downer, and like Susan Happy or whatever, like these two people could have the exact same things happen to them that day. The exact same things could happen to both of these. And when they get home at the end of the day, this person is going to have had a terrible day, and this person is going to have had an incredible day. Why? Because our thought life directs our real life. Our thought life matters. The words that you say to yourself, the narrative that you tell yourself matters greatly. And again, I'm not saying, okay, just speak it out. Like, today is wonderful and everything is awesome and unicorns are real and yes, Lord. Like, it's not that. And this is important. I don't want you to miss this, because if you miss this next passage, it is easy to take this away from the truth of Christ. It's easy to take this and make it a name it, claim it. There's no Jesus in this. But look at what Paul says a little bit later in Romans 12:2. He says, don't copy the behavior and customs of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you'll learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. This idea of shaping our thought life is not about me claiming what I want. It is about recognizing that God chooses to use our mind to shape our life into his image. This is not about me trying to get something that I want. It is about God shaping me into who he already calls me. It is about putting away the dark thoughts in my brain and recognizing God has more. Not because he's a vending machine, but because he is your creator. This is the practice of us leaning into who God has called us to be. Not who we have fantasies about being in all the bank accounts and cars and vehicles and all this stuff. It's God's thoughts and letting those shape my life. A little bit later, to the church in Corinth, Paul writes, and this is the 2 Corinthians passage we're going to sit in for the rest of the night. 2 Corinthians 10, 3-4. We're human, but we don't wage war as humans do. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. Now, we're going to come back to this idea of using God's weapons and what that looks like, and that strange phrase, especially if you didn't grow up in church, like that just made us sound like even more of a cult. We'll unpack it in a second. But strongholds of human reasoning. A stronghold is a fortification. It is something that is impenetrable. A stronghold is something that the enemy cannot cross into, but it is also carries with it this idea of a dungeon, something that traps someone in. And Paul doesn't say there are strongholds that we're stuck in. He says strongholds of human reasoning. It is strongholds of your thought. It is strongholds of the things that you believe, of the things that you think. It made me think of this thing that was going around, and I think is in some cases genuinely hilarious. This guy named Justin Willman, who is, I would argue, one of the worst hosts I've ever seen of a TV show. He hosts Cupcake Wars, and I would prefer not to watch that show, but also watch it on mute. But it turns out the dude is an incredible magician, which is just a weird resume in the first place. But he has this show on Netflix called Magic is for Humans, and they did a promo piece. And it is, you guys, it is just astonishing. He makes people think they're invisible, and they're not. But they think that they are. And the weird part is parents saw that and they're like, oh, I know some dummies. Come here, 4-year-old child. I'm going to make you think you're invisible. And so YouTube and Facebook is filled with these videos of parents where they're like 4-year-olds like, Mom, I'm here. And they're like, I don't know where you are. Where's my child? Which I think is actual abuse. That's too far. But this dude does it with adults. So it's awesome. And what he does, if you haven't seen the video, he puts this ad out in Craigslist and just says, hey, on this day, if any of you think you're like a decent actor and want to prank a stranger, show up. And who is not all about that? So these people show up and he starts kind of unpacking the thing. And everybody's in on it. So some people have certain jobs and roles and lines, and he's got a plant that he's actually going to do a magic trick and make disappear. At one point, he has these 2 people come and pose and another person take a picture in this chair. The chair's empty because there's no mark yet. There's nobody they're pranking yet. And that comes in later. And so then he starts doing this sleight of hand magic stuff. And this random dude comes walking in and he's like, yeah, this is cool. I watch magic in the park. I don't have anything to do with my life. And so he's like, okay, who wants to be part of this trick? I need 2 people. And he pulls the plant and he pulls the dummy and sits them both in chairs. And this is the brilliant part because he's actually a magician. So he goes and does this abracadabra, whatever. And the dude legit disappears. I don't know what happens. It's really frustrating. But this guy's gone, like Thanos, gone. And this dude starts to be like, oh! At that point, because he's next. And so sure enough, he is. He comes over, he puts the sheet over and is like, abracadabra. Very much still there. This dude went nowhere. But everyone in the crowd goes, oh! and they start freaking out. And so this guy's like, and so the magician gets like a fake phone call and walks off. And so everybody around starts being like, where did they go? And so he's sitting there on this stool in the middle of the park like this. And these strangers are being like, dude, where do you think, is there a trap door under there? And so he, at this point, you can see the gears turning in his mind. He's like, and then the people come and they take that picture. And so the person who like takes the picture is like, oh, look at this, and shows them. And he's not in it because they took the picture earlier. But he doesn't know that. And so he starts thinking he is all that. He starts going trying to mess with people's stuff. He like steals something out of these people's picnic and they're like, the wine bottle's floating. And he's totally starts to mess with this guy. Here's what happened. It's something that wasn't true, but had enough convincing evidence. And the evidence started to build. And there was no reason to believe it wasn't true. When more and more people were on board, that it became so convincing that it was captivating. It wasn't true, it wasn't real, but the evidence was convincing. So convincing, it became captivating. And when something captivates our mind, it changes the way that we act. Students, that is a stronghold of human reasoning. That is where we're stuck. So many of us have become convinced that we're invisible, when whatever we're thinking about ourselves is not true. But we have convinced ourselves it is, that we begin to filter the world that way and live our life according to that. I asked some student pastors, some of our teams, some D group leaders, some students, and I just said, what does this look like? What are lies that you think students believe about themselves? What are these strongholds of human reasoning? Just a handful of 5 or 6 that I got back in huge numbers. You're not ever going to be funny enough or good enough or rich enough for them to like you. Your personality is too big for people to tolerate you. You'd be happy if you actually got invited. You're way too overweight. You're way too lazy. You'll never amount to anything. Do you really think Jesus can forgive that? One day, people will see just how fake you are. I don't know what stronghold you are caught in. I don't know what thing you have become convinced is real. But I know for me, and I would bet for you, there are lies that we tell ourselves on a regular basis that are not true, but are convincing. And we tell ourselves this so often, it becomes captivating. And it becomes a filter through which we live our lives. It becomes a stronghold of human reasoning. So what do? Well, check this out. The very next verse. We can go ahead and put that up on the screen. Now, we talked about, we don't have to go back to it, but using the weapons of God, not worldly weapons. Paul says in the very next verse, we destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture the rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. The weapon that we use against these strongholds is not human reasoning, because those are the strongholds. The weapon that we use is the truth of Christ. Those of us that grew up in church, we hear this verse all the time. Take every thought captive. That's not really like a helpful thing because we don't know what that means. But what Paul is saying is take that thought that says you are never going to be good enough, sit it down and teach it to obey Christ. Here's the truth of that situation. We take the thought, we capture it, and we force it to obey truth. We counter it. We break the stronghold by speaking truth into it because our thought life directs our real life. And students, over the past year, there has been a lot of these thoughts in my head. I just made a list of some highlights, which are really lowlights of my life over the past year. And I don't share this to say, oh, I need your praise, or oh, I need your pity. I just want you to know where I have been. Over the past year, I have moved into a job that I love, but was not qualified for. I went from overseeing 150 junior high students to over 550 on our campus, to overseeing our team, to leading a student ministry across all of our campuses. One of the most intimidating things was that I serve in an incredible lineage of men who have done this stuff, who have done it better than I could ever do it, and are still here. Like they didn't leave. And so I very literally still work with the 3 people who have done this before me. So it's very easy, even if no one says it, for my mind to say, well, Brandon would have done this. Well, Tim would have done this. Adam would have done this. Spiritually, I was dry. I'm the dad of 2 girls with no clue what to do. Girls are great, but it's intimidating. Spinning my wheels trying to get healthy and feeling like it was never going to change. Many of you know that my wife's mom passed away last semester. And through that, and through all of the physical health ailments of all of that, I just felt totally incapable of help. So helpless with so many needs and no way to fix any of it. My side of the family has had some not like within the family, but outside forces. It's not my story to share, so I won't share it with you, but Satan's just been attacking my side of the family for years, and we've just been tired. My schedule was crazy. Summer was shaping up to be pure chaos. I was feeling the candle burn at both ends and thought that I wasn't doing anything well. So because of that, turned really critical and really cynical and really sarcastic and really negative. And if our thought life shapes our real life, like if that was what I was constantly dwelling on, obviously I was not in a really healthy spot. So over the summer, a seminary friend of mine who just has the gift of speaking truth in love aggressively. It's probably the best way to put it. Essentially just said, dude, you're being a jerk. Like something's different. And so he sent me a message, and he knew that I grew up under this pastor named Craig Groeschel. So he sent me a message that Craig preached that honestly is like the skin, meat, and bones of what we just walked through, of the power of words and the power of our thoughts. And at the end of the sermon, there were 2 questions. 2 questions after all of the walking through the Romans and 2 Corinthians and Peter and all of that stuff and building this argument. And these are the 2 questions. I'll unpack how I answer this in a second, but I want to put this before you because this is the basis, the foundation for the spiritual discipline that we've been leading up to. And the first question is this: what negative thoughts control my thinking? Now, that's a very easy question to answer at first, but as I'll tell you in a second, it took me 5 weeks to fully answer this. What negative thoughts affect or control my thinking? And so my challenge for you tonight and for the next week would be answer that. Like put it in your phone and just make a list. For some of you, it may be 3 or 4 things. For others, it may be a lot more. For me, to be totally honest, it was literally hundreds that grouped into essentially 13 kind of themes. The next question is this: what spiritual truth blows that up? Like if the weapon is truth and Paul's instruction to us is to take thoughts captive and force it to obey Christ, force it to submit to truth, then the way that we break out of that is by speaking truth to the lie. And so I just made like a little chart of just very basic examples that I think may still be true. If we can go ahead and put that next slide up. So this first box would be what negative thoughts might control your thinking. And this may be true for some of you. You may constantly hear yourself saying about yourself, I'm not smart enough. I don't know what God wants me to do. I hate the way I look. I don't understand the Bible. My personality is too much for everyone else. I'll always make the wrong choice. And we just journal that. We write it down. What are the negative thoughts that really torment me that I can't escape? And this isn't a negative thought like You walk out of the parking lot and somebody moves your side view mirror and you're like, I'll kill you. Oh, that's probably negative. Yes, but that's a different thing. That's a different negative thought. What is it about who you are? And so the second thing, what spiritual truth blows that up? Let's fill in the rest of this chart. Okay, God, what is it? What is the truth to this negativity? God has given me a mind and the ability to reason. God has given me a purpose and I trust his guidance. I'm created and crafted by the King. God's word is living and active. God has given me his Spirit and his people to help me learn it. The Holy Spirit in me is stronger than my wrong desires. What's the negative thought? And how do we make that obey truth? What do we know is true even if we don't feel like it's true? What do we know that God says about us even when we don't feel it? So then you have this list, and I'm going to read mine here in a second. I don't want you to copy mine because they are mine, unless you have the exact negative thoughts, and then, sorry, it's a huge bummer. But I use them, daily. I aim for 6 days a week, and I don't always hit that. And it's embarrassing. I was doing this spiritual discipline every day of saying my truths out loud, saying my words of life out loud, proclaiming them and speaking them. And Emma didn't even know for months because it's weird, right? You, I'm sure, have seen the video of the 8-year-old girl or 4-year-old girl on her kitchen counter or bathroom sink. He's everything is awesome and I'm great. Today's gonna be perfect and it's gonna be wonderful. It's I'm not that, I'm an adult. But everything's gonna be awesome and everything's gonna be great, Lord, I promise. It's embarrassing. It'd be the first thing I do in my office. And then I would hear somebody walking down or a light would come on and be like, Lord, you have called me to do difficult. It's embarrassing. It's gonna be uncomfortable. But the mind that is filled with thoughts of the Spirit leads to life and peace. And I can say, after just doing this from August, that I'm more excited about my job. I'm more passionate about serving my family. I am more confident in what God calls me to do, even when I'm not actually qualified, than I have been for my entire life. And it's just been since August. So when we look at who we are in 5 years, I think there's a huge potential for this to change. So here are the negative things. For me, when I looked and answered this question, because as much as I would like to skip this because it shows you what I'm self-conscious about, I think you need to know that it's not just you. And this isn't something that leaves. These are negative thoughts that I constantly battle even now. But as I journaled, and again, there were over 100 things that I ended up writing down over 5 weeks. These are some of the more thematic pieces. You will never be good enough. You'll never get enough done. You don't pray enough to call yourself a pastor. You're too lazy. You should be farther along in your life if you ever want to amount to anything in the end. You're a fraud. Emma and your daughters deserve so much better. You're not intentional enough with your kids. You're a fake, and everyone is going to find out. Most of mine center around the idea of genuinely feeling like one of them that I read in junior high is I legitimately fear, and I talked about this in my whole interview process even, I fear the idea that FSM could tank and it would be my fault. I fear that. And I have no business fearing that because FSM isn't something that I did. This is God. But I struggle with a crippling fear of inadequacy. And if our thought life directs our real life, man, what kind of life do you think that I was living day to day with those thoughts being constantly here? And so, as the band comes up and we kind of wrap up our time, I started to journal truth. I said, God, how do I make this obedient to truth? How do I take these things that I feel like are true, that evidence is mounting, that it's convincing and captivating my thought? How do I move this and make this obedient to Christ? And so here, as embarrassing and uncomfortable as this is, and as vulnerable as I've ever been, I want you to hear what I say out loud, regularly, on a continuing basis, believing that it's going to shape my thought life. Jesus is my first love. I'm on earth to serve him and his kingdom. I love Emma with my whole heart, and I will lay down my life to serve her. My children will love the Lord and serve God with their entire being. I'll nurture, equip, train, and unleash them to do more for his kingdom than I could ever do or they could ever imagine. I'm growing closer to Jesus every day. Because of him, my family is stronger, my body is healthier, my faith is deeper, and my leadership is better. Every single day, I have been given purpose, direction, and the skills and gifts necessary to execute on those. I'm called to teach and to preach, and I've been given the insight, clarity, intelligence, and creativity to do so. God's word doesn't return void. I'm only accountable for my obedience and submission to his call, not the response to the message. I'm disciplined in everything I do. Christ is stronger than my wrong desires, my laziness, and any lack that spurs its head. My health is an act of worship. Health is not for vanity or pursued in vain. It's a stewarding of the life God has given me. It's a lifelong journey, not a monthly goal. I develop leaders because it's who he's called me to be. I've been called and appointed by the King in every moment and every season. I may not be enough, but in Christ, I have more than I could ever need. He calls me to difficult and overwhelming tasks, but he anoints me before I take my first step. I bring my best and then more. The more is what matters most. In him, through him, and because of him, I am enough. And I say that every morning. Not because I think that I've got some magic to my words, but because I've spent too long letting negative thoughts shape the way that I live my life. And let me just, all the cards on the table, it is not because I say these things that things change. It is because I say these things being a person who has been filled with and changed by Christ. So for those of you in here who you've never given your life to Jesus, I would encourage you to walk through this process still, because it'll get you in a better mental spot and it'll let you think more clearly about your gifts and your talents and your passions. But the power of this comes because Jesus has changed me. It is not my words being spoken into darkness. It is Romans 12. It is God changing me through my mind. And so some of you in here, you know Jesus and you know what that stronghold of human reasoning is. And I would beg and plead that you would walk through these two questions, because I think the things that we say now are going to shape who we're going to be in 5 years and who we're going to be tomorrow. But if we're being totally honest, if you're in here and you've never given your life to Jesus, it is like trying to fight a fire with a fire hose that's connected to nothing. You can try all you want, but nothing's going to change. So maybe tonight you need to wrestle with your strongholds, and you need to say, God, how do I make this obedient to the truth of Christ? But for some of you, you're a couple steps this way. Maybe tonight is the night that you say, I'm tired of trying to figure out how to make my life better. I'm done. Who we are in 5 years is going to be changed by the way that we speak about and speak to ourselves through those 5 years. Would y'all stand as we pray? Lord, thank you for tonight. And thank you that you care enough about who we are to shape us and not leave us in the darkness of our own decisions. As soon as I tell you what, if they're just everyone's still in a posture of prayer with their head bowed, eye closed, if there are any of you in here who truly, like, you are just done trying to fix your life, we believe Jesus came and died, lived a perfect life and all this, we can unpack that, but you know who you are because you feel it in your core, in your bones, that there is something more that you need. And you're ready to leave it all behind and follow this King who changes you, and saves you, and calls you from death into life. If tonight, for the first time, you want to make that decision to follow Jesus, I'm just ask you right now, no fanfare, no pressure, would you just put your hand up? If tonight, for the first time ever, you want your life changed, for those of you that put your hand up, I'm going to say a prayer. It's not magic or anything like that, but I'm going to ask that you just repeat it in your heart. What matters is you mean it, not that you say everything exactly the same. Lord, forgive me of what I've done. It doesn't work anymore. Make me new. Give me life. If you really do bring life and peace, I will follow you for all of my days. Forgive me of the messed up things I've done and make me new. For everybody else, I just want to pray, God, that you would fill us with your life, that you would change us, that you would transform the way that we think. God, that you would rule our minds as we live our lives. Should we pray?